So I've done something like 6 case meetings in the last day for the most part, and I'm gonna be honest, I have really genuinely struggled for the last 4 hours because most of what I was presented was either just okay or they didn't have enough information for me to work with. Montech has stuff for me, which I'm very excited about because we have things to talk about as things that I mostly care about, like function, which is great to see. So we're going to run through the Montech suite. We have not ever really properly covered Montech at Computex in the past. It's found its way into roundups. The cases we're going to talk about include a $64-ish XR. So this is a follow-up to the X3, X4 type of cases you've seen in the past. We've covered them, but XR is going to be in there as the super budget case. We will also be talking about the King 65 Pro over here. And for the King 65 Pro, it's a follow-up to the King 95, except it's supposed to be a little more affordable. Over on this side, the case we're going to be looking at is the Sky 3, and that is this one here in front of me. So this case is very unique because it's got 2 80mm fans mounted down on the bottom, and if we look in the side here, you'll see that there's this shaped steel ramp to push the air up into the case. I've got a lot of thoughts about this. So there's some really interesting acoustic characteristics to consider, but this is something that they're prototyping, playing around with. And the reason I actually care about stuff like this is because it's not a box with 2 fans on the front and 1 on the back. So I get to actually talk about something different. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly's Aeronaut and Hydronaut thermal pastes. Aeronaut is Thermal Grizzly's entry-level thermal solution, marketed as resistant to curing and for long-term endurance. Hydronaut is Thermal Grizzly's next step up, targeted for overclocking and higher performance applications. We've used Hydronaut on a lot of our systems internally over the years. You can learn more at the link in the description below. All right, so we'll start with the cheapest case that's here anyway. This is the XR. Like I said, Montech in the past, they've done the X3 series or X4, I don't remember anymore, but we covered one of them, and that was the one where I think I coined the phrase Molex centipede. All 6 fans are daisy chained together out of the box in true Molex centipede fashion. The Molex centipede is gone. They've gotten rid of it. But the budget remains. So the budget case market has been in a bad way for a while now. It was partly tariffs, it was partly just cost, but there aren't a ton of options for budget cases. We'll need to test to see how it does. The XR, though, comes in 2 variations. So there's a mesh, and then there's a non-mesh. This one is mesh. I can't see it. So it was a risk I was willing to take, put fingerprints on it. So they have wood paneling top and bottom. This one's gonna be $65 or $70. The other one is $64. For the fan configuration, so the XR just came out. I'm gonna get one in right away so we can start testing it and Patrick can run benchmarks through it. It's got 2 120 reverse sides for the non-mesh variants, 1 120 back fan, they're ARGB. And then if you're familiar with the Montech Sky 2, it's kind of that, except scaled down as far as what they're telling me anyway from a tooling perspective, or at least from the interior styling. The mesh variation is 4 fans, so increased by 1. It's got 3 120s in the front, 1 120 in the back. Any of the other fans you're seeing in here are just for show. And then if we look at the case a little closer, so very straightforward standard tooling. I don't know, I mean, power supply shroud's got some perforations in it. Front's got a bunch of holes and some mounts. The back has a cover for PCIe slots, which I've never quite understood, and everything it's extremely standard. Like, there's really not a lot to talk about in terms of features, which is fine, because the feature is the price. So, all right, that's the XR. Don't need to spend any more time on that one. It's really just interesting because it's cheap, has a lot of fans. We'll see how it does in testing. Let's move to the next one. All right, next one is the King 65 Pro. So the King 95 Pro has found its way into our benchmarks. We have it in the Heightwire 70 review and the Corsair 6500 series reviews, if you want to see the thermals for it. This is King 65 Pro. They're going for basically a cheaper variation on the King 95. So I think the play here is if it's someone who wants the 95 but for less money. There are some changes. It feels mostly familiar, but the biggest change is this front panel, where actually if you need the reference to the original, you can look to the right for that styling where it's got the curvature. The new one does not have that. Little bit of a gap here in this fitment, but I guess that's kind of part of the cost savings. Also, this is not quite perfectly aligned, so if I'm going to nitpick it, I've got things to nitpick. But it's supposed to be $90, 3 fans, 120 in the rear, 2 reverse 140s included as well. It's still a dual chamber. It has a dark tinted glass, and then they're targeting Q3 September. And then otherwise, the biggest change is the panel difference. So if we go top down here, you'll see just a bunch of perforated holes, more normal layout, as opposed to off to the right with the King 95 Pro over there, the more original styling. So that's the King 65 Pro. If you're familiar with the King 95, it's very simple. Let's move to the next case. Next one's a prototype also. This is the one I have the most to say just because I find it extremely interesting to think about how it's built. So this is the Sky 3. They are targeting maybe Q1 of next year for the release. And then the price is supposed to be $120 for this case. So again, the part that's interesting, like we said in the intro here, is there's this ventilation in the front. Behind this, there's a dust filter, and then there's two 80 millimeter fans. So common reasons to not use 80 mil, other than just the sort of volume of air you can push at a given location, normally comes down to noise. There are ways to do 80 millimeter without terrible noise, though. It's been done, but it's very uncommon to find it in an ATX case just because you have the space normally to do larger fans. So the reason this one's interesting is because the deflector, I'll call it down here. Now, concepts for testing, what I would want to do with this, if we're able to get it in this state, would be a couple things. One, I kind of want to add almost like a piece of cardstock or metal to the top of the fans here as well to further guide them up and into the GPU. Another thing I'm interested in, I don't think we would try this part though, is this lip right here. I'm really curious to see if we can detect differences in the noise chamber if we shave that down versus not, make it less hard of a wall for that air to hit. And then same thing with reducing the angle or shallowness of that ramp, because the steeper the angle is, the more it's going to push it to the GPU, but also the louder it's going to be. And then just having two 80 mils right next to each other already has some noise considerations. So this is all stuff that Montech is still figuring out. It's stuff that I'm actually very excited to try and test with, again, the hemianechoic chamber especially, but that's kind of the layout. Now for the specs, so they're thinking 120 bucks, two 140 side reverse fans in addition to the lower 80s that we talked about, and then one 140 back for standard. And I had one more thing I wanted to point out, which is that right here, if we pull around this side, there's a side vent, and on the inside of the side vent, it is a steel wall. So they've got that Thermaltake extra dimensional technology, but only up here. It's prototype, there's time. Maybe they'll take the feedback. Let's move to the next one. All right, so this is another one where Montech is experimenting with design. There's some things here that remind me of Lian Li, where we just looked at that 207 case. And the reason it reminds me of it is the sunken approach to the fans in that lower chambers type of thing. So first I want to point out these. I have now seen, I think, 5 people shove their fingers into those fans, which is excellent. And it's really good that they didn't use like an LCP or something that could cause some real damage. They're planning to do a back cover eventually. It's not here right now. It is interesting though, basically shoving those fans into that back compartment where all the cables run out from the motherboard. Now the other part, we're talking about the sunken approach. So down here, no power supply in this area. It's up there in that upper right corner from our current orientation. And what that does, moves it out of the way and then allows the fans in the bottom to get a little closer to the actual source of the air, which is going to be under the case. Now I'd like to see this maybe a little bit higher. We'd have to test it to really be productive on the feedback, but basically getting some better access to air, shove it up into the GPU, kind of like we saw in the 207. So in the back, there's a shroud for the power supply, there's a shroud up here for the cable. This is a cable pass-through where, because it's mounted up front, they're pulling a 18 gauge cable up here, snaking it up into that chamber, plugging it in, and that means that the power supply switch is actually up top. So I asked about it. Montech is planning to maybe cut a hole in here for access to the switch, and then there'll still be a top panel to cover it and obscure it. But that's kind of one of the considerations for the change in layout that they've done. And this case is the HS01, and it is targeted at $100, black and gray models, and then they're planning to do 3 120s front and 2 120s back. So we'll just briefly talk about this, and then we'll go over to the last case. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time here. This, they're calling the HS01 Mini. It's a 32-liter case. It is massive by standards of the word mini, but they're going for micro ATX form factor, not mini ITX, so you could do both, I guess. The power supply on this one has 3 locations. That's top, middle, and bottom. It's doing 4 pre-installed fans, 3 reverse bottom, 1 rear, all 120s, and then $96 the price target, release Q4 probably, and then this kind of, I don't know, it's just a vinyl, basically a fake leather, so that's the layout for the case. I don't know. This one's like I'm not really sure what I think about it. This is the strap that hooks on and over. I am not 100% convinced that this is sufficient to carry it. It would definitely teeter, but from a looks perspective, you can let them know what you think, because they asked me and I was like, I don't know. I like function. I don't really think about looks for this type of thing. So, all right, let's look at the last case. And then the last one we're talking about is the King 95. Who named this? No, I know the name. I know it. You named it. It is the King 95 Mega Pro. So we're going right back to Quake 3 for the naming of this. So the King 95 Mega Pro is a curved front, it's got curved glass. It's familiar in some ways to the 95 non-Mega but Pro. And the biggest change that we were going over is actually right up there in the front. So the fans are at this angle, you can see, which is intended to direct. This is actually something we've talked about a lot in some of our testing over the years, where when you do these side mounts and you shove air at the front when it's encased in glass, it still gets there. It's not like the air has anywhere else to go, but it can help to funnel it more directly. This is something that Cooler Master is doing as well. We'll show that in one of our videos of their suite. It's a much different case, but the concept for at least the fan mounting is similar. For fans pre-installed, they're going for 7. So the layout is going to be as seen here, except for the AIO. So it's going to be 3 on the sides there, 3 in the bottom, 1 in the back. They're targeting a $200 price point with the 7 fans, Q1. And I think that's pretty much all I have to say about this one for now. So it's basically going to be, I'm very curious to see the thermal performance on it. So every now and then you fill all the slots like this. It's possible you make it a little bit worse than if you don't, just because of how the air moves around the case and how the fans start to fight the other fans. So we'll test it out. But anyway, $200 for this one. That is the, I think, most expensive one we've talked about. Everything else is like as low as 60s, up to 90s, 100s. So that's going to be it for Montech's booth here at Computex 2024. Definitely, I would say this is probably the best showing of cases that I've seen at the show physically. Lian Li is for sure the #1 competition in terms of probably good $80-ish, $100 cases. They're probably there because I need to test it when we get back. So thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. We'll see you all next time.